Hey guys, welcome back to Solid on the Rock. This is going to be episode 1. Today we're going to kind of dive into my childhood and my upbringing, and my wife's childhood and her upbringing, and kind of the differences and
just different things that we both experienced growing up and how we kind of merged that into our marriage. So if you guys are new here, my name is Rita.
I'm Jeff.
And this is Solid on the Rock. This is our podcast. And it's, like Jeff said, it's our very first episode. So we're going to dive right in. Ready?
Yep.
Okay. So just to give you guys a little bit of information. So we only discuss like the topic that we're going to, talk about on the podcast. We don't like prep each other. So we want it to be like as real and raw as possible. So there's probably things I'm, gonna hear for the first time because there's just so much to unravel. Like we've been together for going on 8 years now. But I feel like you just have to always continue to learn your spouse, and you find new things every day, especially like your childhood, There's so much like shifts that took place. So sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this happened. And I'm like, you never told me that, and vice versa. So yeah, this is real. This is raw, uncut. We're amateurs at this. So our editing is not the best, but we're not here for that. We're just here to share our story.
And a lot of times too, like, I feel like so much has happened through my period of life. And there's things I don't even remember from my childhood, or even as my teenage years. And then, like, I don't know, like some things will just come back to me.
Yeah.
And that's where the things like, oh, you don't even know, is like something will spark that, or you know what I mean?
True.
That's how that will come.
So for me, I feel like, I had a pretty structured childhood. I grew up in church, so, it was a little different for me than it was for you. But I feel like my family is also very like close, almost to a fault sometimes, right? Like because we're so close, we like overshare things, and we're like, we're always talking. And literally me, my mom, and my sisters have a group chat, and I mean, I had to clear my storage like the other day because I ran out of storage on my phone, and it was literally all my mom and my sister's group chat. And then I had like 30 gigabytes left to use on my phone of data. So we're all really close. I have a really large family, and so like we have a lot of like traditions. So we always all get together for Christmas, Thanksgiving, like Easter. So, I mean,
all the holidays,
yeah.
All the holidays were together.
Up until COVID, like, obviously, then we were like, okay, let's, we kind of did our own thing from there. But, I mean, when we got together, I mean, wouldn't you think it was like a culture shock for you? Because it was like, oh, we go to my grandma's and like, yeah, everybody comes over. And it's like, literally, everybody comes over. But I had that my entire life.
Yeah, like I don't want to touch on that yet because it's kind of like...
Yeah, that's like a whole other topic. That opens up a whole other door, right?
Yeah. Like I remember like going to your house for the 4th of July for the first time.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? Like I remember that night so vividly. But yeah, it was nothing that I had ever experienced before.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, but that's a perfect example of like the differences in growing up. Like then you have to merge that, and you're like, whoa, that looks different for me.
Yeah.
Like, and then even like with your family, you have such a smaller family than I am. Like, oh, okay, like it's different. It's so much more quiet. And
yeah, but
like,
even for being a small family, it was still very different from your traditional small family.
Right. And I grew up like because I'm the oldest and there's 3 girls, it's me and my 2 sisters. I'm like the son, like oddly. I played football. I played with boys. I think I was the only girl on the team. I think, 1 year I was the only girl on the team. And then I played basketball. Like I played basketball forever. It's my favorite sport. So I grew up like very tomboyish too. And like, I know like because we're such a close family, like my uncles were like extremely involved. Like my uncle John was like another dad for me. Like we would go outside, like he like between him and my dad, like they taught us like how they taught me. But that's fight. Just like, that's kind of how I grew up. I was like the son, you know, the son my parents always wanted, and unfortunately they didn't get to have. But I wouldn't want it any other way. So I grew up very having such a close and big family that also brought like a lot of, you know, different perspectives and hardships, I think, because you weren't used to like, oh yeah, my sister knows that, like I told her, you know, like, and you're like, why would you tell your sister that? And then, you know, it was just it played some factors in our relationship for sure when we were like, okay, our family's like super in our business as well, right?
Yeah, but not too. It didn't play that big of a factor.
No, not huge, but I mean, there were times where we were like...
Yeah, but because like, I mean, even I go to them like for things too, you know?
Yeah, especially in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my childhood. I would say, you know, I think for me too, it's all such a blur because I had to grow up fast, right? Like I got pregnant at a really young age. I got pregnant with my oldest at like 15, and that was with like my first marriage, which is, you know, how we're a blended family. So I wasn't married at 15. That sounded like that, huh? But yeah, I had 2 kids from my previous relationship, which was my previous marriage. So for me, I feel like I grew up really fast. And then after that, it was like, that was my whole life. After that was like being a mom and like trying to find that balance of being a teenager, being a mom. Like I had to work right away. So I feel like I kind of grew up fast in a sense, you know? So yeah. What about you?
I obviously grew up very different from how she did. A much smaller family. I have 1 sibling. And I never knew my dad until I was 18, but I'll get to that more in the story. So he was never present. It was just my mom. And I don't really remember too much of being very young. I remember a few like moments or memories, you could call them. But we grew up pretty rough. I don't remember at what age we started like having to move in with people and living with friends and stuff like that. But I would probably have to say around 6 or 7. I think around that time, my mom fell into addiction and lost her job. And so from there, we really kind of started struggling as a family. I don't really remember too much discipline or like disciplinary actions, so to speak. If I did have any, I don't really remember them.
Yeah.
I feel like I was kind of more like able to do kind of what I wanted, a little more leniency because I wasn't like, well, the eyes weren't on me all the time, you know, and I knew that, so I would manipulate that and I would take advantage of that. And that kind of got worse as I got older, and then I really started taking advantage of that. And then around, I'd say maybe, I think 5th grade, I went and I lived with one of my friends, which, I mean, it kind of sucked, but it was kind of cool at the same time, you know?
Yeah.
Like living with your friend, going to school with him. And then in between that time after that, we were still kind of just moving around house to house with people and stuff. At one point, we did get an apartment for a little while. But I mean, I've lived in like the back of our Ford Bronco, stayed a couple nights in the empty riverbed. Kind of just here and there wherever we could.
That's a good place to kind of like preference to the difference in me and you is like I've always lived here, you know, so like even now, like I have friends that I've had since like, well, you know, like I'm like, oh, I went to kindergarten with them, or oh, I went to like first grade with them.
Yeah.
And for you, I'm like, you're like, I don't even know my friend's name, but it's so weird to me.
I don't have any contact with any of my friends from when I was little, not even the ones I lived with, or like my really good friends who I'd be at their house, stay the weekend with them and everything.
Yeah.
But I did want to touch on like, I never had that like sibling relationship. I mean, obviously I kind of had a relationship with my sister, but we were never had that close bond of relationship like you guys have, you know?
Yeah.
And so for me, like when we got together, like that's when I found out what that was, you know, like,
yeah,
like
how close me and my sisters are.
No, like I had that closeness with them, and I still do. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I never knew that family dynamic, like until I got with you.
Right.
I was about 12, 13, somewhere around there. Then at the age of 15, I was a freshman. I ditched school one day, and one of the people we were living with, no, we weren't living with them, I'm sorry, yet.
Oh, okay.
We had our own place in Dinuba, and me and him had ditched school one day, and we went back to his place, and that's where I was introduced to crank, meth.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it wasn't crystal meth, but it was crank, but that's how I got introduced to that at the age of 15. I kind of did a little bit here and there for a few weeks, and then my buddy's mom, or I don't know what you want to call her, but he called her his mom.
Oh, okay.
She found out that we had took her stuff, and so she made me tell my mom that what I had been doing. And so I had to tell her, and you know, like I was really scared to tell her, but I didn't really have any, like, there was no discipline for it. You know, it was more kind of like I'd rather you do it kind of here than be out on the streets trying to hide it, running around in dangerous situations. But you know, that kind of created my whole next chapter of my life till the time I was 25. At that point I started using meth at the age of 15. Started stealing cars, running the streets. I did that for years. Pretty much at the age of 16, I kind of just went out. I wasn't living with my mom anymore. Kind of just started doing my own thing, going here, going there. And then at the age of, I want to say 21 is when I got arrested for the first time.
And that kind of kicked off that cycle of like in and out of the system.
Yeah, I had kind of, I hadn't never been arrested before that. But once it started, it didn't stop for a while. Like
that's why they call it the cycle. It's like it is a cycle.
So when I was 21, I got arrested. I was staying at some guy's apartment. I would like give them drugs to stay there. But I was robbing houses too, literally living on the streets, staying in a parking lot behind some apartments, like in this little hole in between the washroom and another wall to the outside. And so from there, everything kind of started escalating. My crime began to be harder and more severe things. And then from there, it kind of just, the domino effect, me going in, getting out, going in, getting out. up until I was 25, and that's
Can I
kind of where I met
say
you.
something?
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
it never really like, I never compared the two until like hearing you say it. But like things shifted for me at 15 and things shifted for you at 15. Don't you think that's weird?
Yeah.
I never like put the two together like, oh yeah, because obviously I got pregnant at 15 and then, you know, you had your like shift. And I like that you said it was that chapter of your life, right? Because the great things about chapters is they end. And when they end, a new one begins. And it's, I mean, I feel like in some sense, like, you know, that the chapter, even though like, you know, sometimes they're really long chapters, like you really don't get to the better part of the book unless, you know, every chapter that you finish, it gets better and better, right?
I mean, that chapter for me lasted literally 10 years, from 15 to 25.
Right. As parents, we have that responsibility to instill that into our children so that way they have that option. Like you said, like it was a cycle for you. It was a 10-year chapter. It was a 10-year cycle that you had. But had, you know, your mom not introduced you by taking you to church, like there's that little seed that's planted in you. And there was that seed that was, you know, planted within me. And, you know, like just because I grew up that way, like it doesn't make me any better than you.
Yeah.
Right? Like just because when you developed a relationship with God, you were already like 25, right? So just because I spent longer time like learning and growing up and whatever does not make me better, right? Like there are times where I lean on you for faith, right? And I'm like, I grew up in this, I should know better than that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Jeff, like what are we gonna do? And you're like, just have faith, it's okay, it'll work out. So I mean, people would consider you a baby Christian in that aspect, right? Not now, but at 25.
Yeah.
And I would be more of a seasoned Christian. But realistically, like it doesn't matter. You can always get it right at any given time. And you have the tools to be able to shift that, you know, generational curse and break that for your family, for your kids at, you know, what, probably like 5 years old, at 25 years old, at 50 years old. Like it's never too late.
Yeah.
And it's never too late to teach that to your children. So, I mean, I think that's one of the greatest things about having the relationship with God and truly seeking him is that it doesn't matter what age you are, like, you know, he's going to welcome you in and he can break that cycle and end that chapter of your life, right? Like the bad part of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, to go along with that, like me and our oldest daughter, we got baptized Easter of 2015. So like, look at the age difference, but it's never too late.
Right.
Like especially when you look at it like that, like she was 9, I was 25, and we got baptized on the same day. Like, it's never too late. You're never too old. You're never too broken. You're never too lost. You're never too addicted.
Right.
You're never too anything to come to Christ.
Right. Yeah. And with that being said, so going back to the childhood part of it, for you, and for us, I should say, a really cool thing that I think people don't really know is like, so my maiden last name is Pena. Yours, that's not your last name. You took on my last name. And that is so like rare, especially nowadays. Usually, obviously, the woman takes on the men's.
Untraditional,
Yes.
they would say.
Oh, yes. Thank you. It's very untraditional.
I mean,
but do you want to like
into
share
our story just a little bit?
Yeah.
But you know, as we told you, like I didn't have that family dynamic. So when I got with you, and like I was embraced by that family dynamic, like I loved it. You know what I mean? Like I had never had that. I never felt that before.
Because we're all loud, and everybody hugs everybody.
Yeah, and it's just like I don't know the word to explain it. It's just homely, you know what I mean? Like I felt welcomed and like I never felt like outcasted or like anything like that. I never felt like I was not welcome there or anything at all, you know?
Yeah.
And so for me, my family dynamic wasn't strong
At that point in your life.
yeah, growing up. And so like my maiden name, I guess you would say, wasn't even my dad's. And I forgot to touch on my dad growing up. And I'll just recap on that. I didn't know my dad. At the age of 18, I found a paper with his number on it. I called him. He lived up north. And so he would drive through the Central Valley every day. So I met him 3 times for maybe 20 minutes. And then he passed away of a heart attack in early March working. So that's that. I never had a relationship with him or anything.
Yeah.
My last name was not his last name. So it wasn't anything that I was just like,
it wasn't this is the
I'm
male.
gonna carry it on. I kind of I felt the love and the family ties from you guys, and that's why I wanted to take your last name, you know, and then
and you asked for permission and everything. We don't have to get into all that, but yeah.
I asked and waited very impatiently for my answer. But I'm a Peña.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's cool. It's very rare, and we still get like, wait, especially from people who know me, because like I'm from here, and so because you're not like from here, like, you know, obviously people don't really know you like that, but you know, they're like, wait, are you guys really married? We are really married.
Yeah. Or like when we go to file our taxes, they're like, okay, what's your maiden name? And she's like, Peña.
Yeah.
And they're like, but how?
I'm like, just put it.
Yeah, and then we got to tell them like, oh, I took the last name.
We always get that weird look too, like, I'm like, just do it.
You know,
it is what it is.
When I first started going around and stuff, like I gained 40 pounds in like 3 months.
Yeah, beans and rice.
3 months, I gained 40 pounds.
Tortillas.
Like, I think when I met you, I was 190, and that's the most I had ever weighed. Like fresh out.
Don't get into all the details. That's for the next episode, I think. Maybe we'll see.
But I had never experienced that before. You know, like eating every day at the same time. You know, dinner's right around that same time.
Yeah.
Like every day. Breakfast. You know what I mean? Like grandma making burritos throughout the day and stuff. Like
she fluffed you up for sure.
Yeah. Like, and then you're cooking, and then like it was like everything was new to me. I had never been like introduced to that food, you know, except for chili verde.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, who doesn't know what chili verde is? But not good chili verde with
like real homemade
tortillas. But
that's a whole other episode. Don't even get into the cooking. It was like you lived your childhood like a different childhood, right? That's how I feel, because I would see him and like just the look in your face all the time would be like, it just like, he's like a kid. And I still tell people like, oh, he's my he's my 5th kid.
Like even like the holidays, being at the holiday, I remember like our first like Christmas, like was so weird for me, like to be there and like everybody there. All the uncles and aunts and then like
cousins
we all played that game, and I like had to actually talk and stuff when we played the white elephant game.
Oh yeah.
And for me, I'm like,
yeah,
I'll take that one.
Yeah. I'm like, no, get brutal. Like these people don't play. They're gonna get what they want to get. Yeah. Back into the childhood part of it. You know, I feel like there are a lot of times in our relationship where, like I had mentioned earlier, like I see a lot of the child, like the little child Jeffrey in you. And I think that, you know, so a lot of people say when we like got together, like, oh, I don't know, without getting too far into our story, the question has come up a few times about like, well, do you feel like you have to mother him? You know, and I feel like people may perceive it that way because maybe they feel like, oh, you know, your relationship with your mom was a very different dynamic than what obviously my relationship with my family was. But does that make sense? Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, how do you feel like in your childhood those relationships played factor into your relationships as an adult?
Well, they very much so did. Like, I notice, you know, from going to therapy, like, identifying things that I do in our marriage and our relationship that stemmed from the way I grew up. Like, you know, when you have a problem with me or something, or something needs to be addressed, you know, like, you're vocal about it, you can express yourself. For me, you know, I've gotten a lot better on my feelings, but, you know, like, especially in the beginning, I never expressed my feelings.
Right.
I would hold them in.
Right.
But that comes from the instability and like not really having somebody I can trust to go to talk to, you know, and or like when situations would happen, like we would just go into a different situation. It was never addressed.
Right.
Or anything, you know, we kind of just ran from it. We ran from the situation into a different situation. And so those things do definitely show up in our marriage. And those are kind of the things that, you know, we still work on. And I still work on, you know. A lot of these things are things that I've known and I've kind of been working on them, but they're more now that I'm in my own individual therapy.
Right.
To where I can see where they stemmed from instead of just wondering.
And I like that you bring that up because it kind of reminded me of something, but I think it's really important and people don't understand that, you know, your childhood does play factor in your relationships and the way you talk to people and the way that you communicate. Like I said, like it was always a conversation. Like you know, I've told you the story, like I rode my bike further than I was supposed to, right? Then it was like, oh, you can ride your bike, you know, this mile radius or whatever. And everything was like a lesson. Like my parents would be like, well, you need to understand and blah, 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 blah. And it'd be like a whole lecture. And so I feel like I feel like that's how I know that's how I talk to my kids, right? You know, I'm like, do you know why you're in trouble? And then it would be like a whole conversation of why I, you know, set the rule, why, you know, I felt like this needs to be addressed or whatever. And we are the same. Well, I feel like I more so, especially earlier in our relationship, I am very vocal and I'm like, hey, I don't, you know, like I didn't really appreciate that or whatever the case is. And, you know, that was because I grew up like with that, even with like my friends and like my relatives, like, you know, a lot of times it would be like conversations. And for you, it was more like, I think that the inner child comes out, right? And it's like, you were like shut down, deflect, like, or like, let's take a whole detour of the situation so we don't have to address the
actual like main part of it.
Right. And so for so many people, we don't realize like how we have to address that like inner child to understand why, and then things just start to click, right? Like you said, when you started to do your own like individual therapy, you're like, oh, like that, okay, like now I'm connecting the two. And I just want to say, like, you've done a lot better in that. Like, I'm so proud of the way you are now expressing yourself, because a lot of times, like, I think from your childhood, and it didn't click until you told me that you learned that in your own individual therapy, that, you know, when we would talk about things, you would be like, I'm just not going to share all this information. I'm just going to share this is what I feel like you need. And then like, that's it. And for me, I'm like, I need every piece to this puzzle so I can see what you're talking about, right? And that goes back to the way you grew up. Like you said, like I kind of did whatever I wanted. And then here you're like, here's structure, somebody with structure, and here's somebody like, I'm a wild child, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it, but, and then we're trying to be like, oh, hold on. I'm like, hold on. We need to organize our closet. And then you're like, just throw it wherever, you know? Like,
why?
Yeah, and I think when you say that, it just kind of reminds me, like, we do really have to address certain things and be like, okay, like, yeah, maybe I learned wrong. Like, even for me, like, yeah, maybe that probably wasn't the best solution. But I think it really does your childhood plays into the way our relationship, you know, like, kind of especially started off, right?
Yeah.
And then mine too. So yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, is like, you really have to heal your inner child and like kind of dig deep, like, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Like,
you don't necessarily like think about it or notice it, like, as an adult, like, where you and your morals and your personality and everything actually comes from, and your like thinking process and your fight or flight process. Like, you don't think about where all that comes from for yourself, you know? And so for a lot of people, like, they don't even think like, oh, I did that when I was 5 or whatever, but like that's where it develops for you.
Yeah, definitely. And it plays into all of your, you know, the most beautiful part about like living the childhood that you lived and the way I lived, you know, and I grew up and the way you grew up, is we have the opportunity to shift that for our kids, right? And we have the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to take this and I'm going to take that and I'm going to leave that out, and then I'm going to put that into my children. And sorry, go ahead.
It's almost like we have the perfect setup. Like, we have this end of the spectrum and we have this end of the spectrum, and if we can do it right and come together, you know, like, I bring qualities and stuff that I do not want our kids to to, you know, and
so would it be called qualities?
Oh yeah,
I'm
I
just
guess
kidding.
not.
I'm totally
kidding. Different things,
aspects, or
that, you know, I can see and help change and reroute, and you bring different aspects that you can help change and reroute. And so we both kind of bring something
positive out of and then put that into our children. And the best part, and something I said about in the intro was, you know, we have the secret weapon, you know, which is God. And realistically, like, you know, because we had to edit the video, right? And so I'm like, horrible word, wrong word to use. It's not so much that it's a secret weapon, like, but it's almost like your little, like, special like, you know, your special ingredient, because it just changes everything. Like, it gives the flavor, it gives the meaning behind everything. And so you growing up with your knowledge of, you know, like, of God and a relationship, and then mine, like, we can make a difference in our kids' lives and make sure that they have that foundation. Like, we have to set the foundation for our kids to say, like, okay, and I tell you this time, like, I don't want Jay knowing that. Like, you know, you're like, I'm not having Allie say that. You know what I mean? Like, but we have that. And then we also have that foundation to show our kids, like, we did that, but it's not okay. You know, like, look at how far, like, you always share with our kids, like, your story, and you're like, look, like, I did that for 10 years. You want to do that for 10 years? No, I don't even want you to do it for 2 years. I don't even want you to do it for 10 months. And, you know, so it's not like, you know, I didn't mean to say in that sense, like, oh, we have the, you know, but like, I feel like when you have God, you have the answer, right? And we never intended to put this, you know, podcast out like, oh, we know it all, like, and oh, we're, you know, so great. Like, this is literally just to be like, hey, we've been through some stuff, like, and if we can sit here, like, when we get to our story and everything that has transpired throughout our 8 years of, you know, like, being in a relationship, it's like, wow, You can, if we can overcome these obstacles, then you can too. We are not saying we have all the answers.
Yeah, we're not even saying it's easy. Like,
right, we're still learning, we're still growing,
and we're still fighting. And
yeah,
you know,
for our marriage, not each other.
Yeah,
just kidding. We're fighting too.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's therapy. Like, we do therapy, and like just because you have God and He's in the center does not mean everything's easy and like,
right.
You know, your path is just set out for you. You know, like there's still work and trials and tribulations that come with it.
Yeah, and there's still healing of like the things that we learned in the younger age. We really have come a really long way from, you know, our younger selves, and still like that younger self still kind of pops up in our relationship, and those are things that we're still working on. And I think it's just great that, you know, and like I shared earlier, like I was a young mom, and so many times I've apologized to Serenity, like, I'm sorry, you got like the worst version of me, you know. I was still trying to grow up and, you know, try to be a mom and like all these new responsibilities, but it really makes us who we are. And we have the decision to like do a pity party and, you know, poor me, or we have the opportunity to, like you said, take the positive and instill that into our children.
And, you know, like you said, how you apologize to Serenity, like I apologize to them, like, you know, like, I'm sorry, like I didn't have a dad to show me, you know, so like I feel like there's people out there who had their mom and dad, but, you know, like you're never perfect,
right?
Everybody has something,
right,
you know, about them, and that's not bad, you know what I mean, like that's not wrong.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of take pride in, you know, what I do have to offer my kids now, coming from where.
And if you could tell your younger self, like, worst time of your life, like super, like you shared so many things, like, you know, like I was young and like I never had nice clothes, I never had nice shoes, I wore the same socks, right? Like, and I mean, you're like, I never had a haircut. Like I was always so, you know, like poor. And I mean, I love that about you, because honestly, Jeff, that made you who you are today. That is why you're such a hard worker, and you're such an amazing dad. You are so like just driven, and we'll get more into that. But you know, that made you chose to turn that, you know, I don't even want to call it negative, because it's just a part of your story. So it's not negative, because you just turned that into such like a positive thing in your life. And you should be proud of yourself for that, because a lot of people use that as like, as a crutch. They're like, oh, well, I had it too hard. Sorry, you don't understand. And you took that and you made so much for yourself and for your kids. So you should be very proud of yourself. I just wanted to tell you that, because I know I've told you that before, but you know, you can't hear it enough, right? You're doing an amazing job, and you're like one of the hardest workers that I know. So you've done so well for yourself, and he's like an inspiration for those who are in that situation or have been in that situation. Like, if he can do it, you can do it too. But if you could go back and you can tell your younger self, the one who was like in the rut, like, what advice would you give yourself?
Don't do it.
Oh gosh. I always tell you, I wish I could rewind. Remember, I can rewind time and then go and slap you and then be like, you'll get it later, and then go back to where we are now.
Yeah.
So that's what you would say, or are you just what's the advice you'd give yourself?
Seek God, and it's all for something.
That's good.
Like even the hard times, like it's all for something. Like all those hard times built me who I am.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In many different aspects.
Yeah.
You know, because I remember like growing up and like, I always be like, why, you know? So.
Why me? And,
I mean, I think that I would tell myself, you know, it's all for something.
Yeah. That's good advice. Okay.
What about you?
Oh, that's a good question.
Don't do it too?
Probably like it gets better. Yeah. Because I think I've gone through a lot of, you know, like hard times, more so after having Serenity, because then it brought on like, you know, I got pregnant really young and then I was with her dad for 10 years.
You know, usually you become an adult when you're 18, 20. That's when you have to become responsible.
Right.
But for you, it started at 15. You
yeah.
had to start working, and you...
as soon as, my 16, like 3 days after my 16th birthday, I was like working.
You had to grow up.
Yeah, I think I tell myself it gets better. When I think about like those days where I, you know, was just like stressed out, or like it gets better. Yeah. And not to give up, for sure. Not to give up.
It's all for something, right?
All right, guys. So I do want to share something before we end this. It's a verse from Proverbs 22:6. This is a New King James Version. And it reads, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So I think that is a perfect verse to sum up kind of what, you know, we've experienced in our lives and in our childhood is, you know, our parents, like I said, my parents instilled that in me when I was younger, and all of my family really, like, especially on, you know, the Peña side of the family is like pastors and preachers and worship leaders, and, you know, so, you know, they instilled that into me when I was younger, and
Here I am today.
even though you had like the upbringing that you had, and you had a much different experience with that, you know, your mom instilled that in you, whether you knew it then or not. She planted that seed within you. And so this just goes to show that, you know, God's word is true. If you train up a child in the way he should go, when he is old, he will not depart from it. So we grew up, we knew, we have free will. We chose to do, you know, make the decisions in life that we chose. And here we are now, and we're still like not 100%, right? Like we're not exempt, and we're not perfect. We still struggle with a lot of things. And like I said, we don't have all the answers, and I'm not pretending to, and he won't pretend to either. Like, we want to make sure this is raw and real, and also show you that like all you have to do is be like persistent and continue to pursue your relationship, and little by little, you know.
And like, you know, I think the hardest part, you know, with your walk is, you know, the ultimate goal is to live your life fully and 100% like Christ-like, right?
Right.
But to do that is so hard.
It's so easy, but it's so hard.
It sounds easy, but when you're in the flesh, it's so hard.
Well,
you know, and like, as long as you stay with it, if you fall off, get right back on it.
Right. That's the most important thing.
Fall off again, get right back on it.
Right.
You know, like,
don't stay in that.
You might fall off every day, but at the end of the day, you know, repent, ask for forgiveness, and get right back on it. Right. And then try not to make that same mistake again.
Right.
You know, and try to grow a little bit more.
In our relationship, you know, we've had that too, where it's like you're falling off and I'm praying for you. And because we planted the seed, because your mom planted that first seed. And then, you know, we as my family planted, you know, we watered too, and we just kept like pouring into you.
Yeah.
Our prayers and our faith and us instilling that into you brought you back. And so you guys will have to come back to hear more about all of that good stuff, about the praying and planting, and you falling away or me falling away, and you praying for me to come back and me praying for you to come back, because that's a part of our story. So that'll be our next episode, is talking
Yeah.
about us and how we started,
How
where we started.
met and
Yeah. And all those little watering
yeah.
of that
And all
seed.
the bumps in the road.
Yeah, the rocky soil.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I hope you guys were blessed with tonight's episode. Do you have anything else you want to share before we call it a night?
No, just share, like, and subscribe.
Yeah. Hopefully you guys are encouraged. And thank
Yeah.
you guys for your support, by the way. Everybody who tuned into our intro,
Yep.
came back for the first episode. Yeah, so
Excuse our editing and
yeah.
we're not the best, but we're learning as we go.
Yeah, it's okay because we're not doing it for that anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. My kids are like, "Oh, we have YouTube parents."
Yeah.
So lame. But yeah, so make sure you guys tune in for our next episode. This will be episode 2 coming up of Solid on the Rock, and hear all about how we tried to plant our seed initially on concrete and how well that worked out.
Yep.
Yep. All right, guys.
Have a good night.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye.